Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Food School Smarter, Stronger, Leaner podcast on a mission to inspire a world where food makes us better. Today, guys, I have something special for you, something I'm really excited about, and I really love doing that, and I am sure you love listening to it. So we have a podcast episode with Karl D. Smet, a librarian, a keeper of sourdough library in Brussels, Belgium. Karl is probably one of the people who know the most about the science and history and application of this food technology, this fermentation technology that we call sourdough. You probably have heard about sourdough bread. Well, today you're gonna learn what exactly it means, sourdough bread. How is it different from other kinds of breads? How amazing this food technology, sourdough, is. How much in common it has with yogurt or chocolate or cheese, and why sourdough is better for your gut health, especially for those of you guys who might be gluten and grain products sensitive. You're gonna also hear a lot of amazing stories about different sourdough cultures around the world. It's one of the most ancient food technologies we have as humans. You're gonna learn some simple, amazing, delicious recipe, one of the best probably recipes out there of sourdough Belgium waffle. So guys, I'm very excited to share this episode with you. So without further ado, please enjoy our fascinating conversation with a keeper of sourdough library, Karl D. Smet. Karl, how do you pronounce your last name? So
De Smet.
De Smet.
Yes.
Well, I'll try to do my best. So first of all, thank you for joining me for this lovely chat on Food School Podcast to tell us, myself and our listeners, about this wonderful thing, sourdough, that I think we all need to learn more about. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your amazing food career.
Okay, so I will turn 50 in November. I was born in 1970, and from
congratulations in advance.
Thank you. I hope I can throw a party with lots of people, but I doubt. So as of the age of 14, I'm actually busy with food, even before, because I always like to cook at home and to make cookies or whatever. And so at the age of 12, I decided that I wanted to be a confectioner. So I went to confectionery school in Belgium. And when you do confectionery, you also get bakery, chocolate, and ice cream making and so on. So at the age of 18, I got my degree, and I worked for 6 years in a confectionery in Brussels. And then in 1994, I joined Puratos, the company I still work for, as a test baker. And over the years, I've worked in different fields. I did test baking. I was technical advisor. I was product management. I did training, product training. And today, as of 2008, actually, I'm in charge of the Center for Bread Flavor, and this is the location where I'm located. Where I'm right now, where the sourdough library is located. And it's a center where customers from all over the world come to visit us to learn more about fermentation technology. We have a bakery here where we can develop products together with them. We have a kind of museum where we tell the history of the bread. And so it's a nice place. It's a magical place, actually, within the world of bakery, because it's very unique and it exists nowhere else. And besides that, I like to sing. I like to play guitar. I like to do a little bit of cycling. I have a wife. I have 2 children, a dog, and 2 cats that I love.
Life.
Yes.
Uh, Sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing. And tell our listeners now a little bit more about sourdough part of your career. And what is this thing, sourdough? Because, these days a lot of people don't even know what it is.
Yes. Well, I didn't know neither. Going to bakery school here in Belgium, I never learned in school actually what sourdough was. We had in my entire, so I did 4 years of intensive training, and we never spoke about sourdough except for 1 hour during a class about a theoretical class about German rye breads. That was the only time that sourdough was mentioned, but we never made one. I never saw one. And it was only when I started within Purados back in '94 as a test baker in the lab, I had to try ingredients. I was checking different enzymes. I was checking different sourdoughs. And that's when I met the very first sourdough I saw in my life. We have it here in the library. Still, it's number 43. And that was for me like a discovery of something new. I opened that bucket and it had a weird flavor, and I had to feed it. It started to bubble, and I baked a sourdough bread with it. It was a typical San Francisco style bread, and I didn't have to use yeast. And that was for me like I'm a curious person, so I like to know what is going on. And so discovering what is going on in sourdough was actually quite exciting, because there's a whole science behind this amazing fermentation. And so as of '94, I was not always full-time occupied with sourdough. It's only since 2008 that I'm really, every day, I dedicate full-time to sourdough. And then, since 2013, having the library, it's even amplified. So I have the unique chance, because there is only one library, and as such, there's only one librarian. I have the chance that when I feed these sourdoughs, that I can smell them, I can taste them, I can see their differences, and it's giving me a lot of insights in this amazing thing that is actually called sourdough.
So, what exactly is it? Like, how is it made? How does it come to be?
Yes. Well, actually, making sourdough is very simple. If I give you a recipe and a method, probably everybody is able to do that if you follow a couple of rules. It's just mixing flour and water. Same quantities, 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour, or you can start even with 25 grams of flour, 25 grams of water, and every day. So you mix it, you make sure that the bowl or the jar that you use is clean, and you mix it, you scrape the sides, you make sure that there is no sticky or dry parts. You cover it so that there is nothing that can go into like little fruit flies in summertime or whatever. And you leave it on the kitchen counter, let's say, for 24 hours at a temperature of minimum 20 degrees. So when you make sourdough, you need to be between 20 and 35 degrees. And you leave it there for 24 hours, and then you feed it again with the same quantity of flour and water. And as such, every day you repeat this, and you will see that after 3-4 days, it can happen that it stinks. And that's the moment that many people say, oh, I did it wrong, and they throw it away. But you shouldn't. That's the moment, it's the battle that starts between the yeasts and the lactic acid bacteria. And some yeasts are dying, and that's giving that smell. So you just have to keep on feeding, and you will see that after 6, 7, 10 days, the sourdough starts to have a little sour flavor. And when you taste it, it's a bit like yogurty, that kind of acidity. And when you prepare it, and you will see that after 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, it doubles in volume. That's the moment that your sourdough is ready. And it's actually that the balance between the lactic acid bacteria and the yeasts have come together. They have kind of raised the white flag. They stop fighting. They have this balance, and that's when the sourdough is ready. And then you can start baking, and that's when the complexity starts, because making a sourdough bread is more complex than making a bread that you prepare just with yeast if you do that for the first time. And making 1,000 breads or 10,000 breads every day, that's really a challenge with sourdough.
So how is it different from regular bread? Like you said, the sourdough is ready. By the way, like how many days does it usually take for it to be ready?
Well, I should say that it is about 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
I think 7 days is a good average. It can be faster and it can be slower, but 7 days should be okay. But there is a simple method. If you would have a pH meter, you can measure the pH, and the pH should be below 4.1, because that means that all the pathogens that are present are killed. That's the beauty about fermentation, is that Mother Nature has decided everything that is below 4.1 is food safe.
Okay. Yeah, that makes, it's safe by default if you do everything right.
Absolutely.
And so the sourdough is ready, and then you can start baking, right? So how is it different from, let's say, I don't know, any other bread?
Yes. Well, the speed. I think that in a bakery school, we are formatted to make a maximum amount of bread in a minimum amount of time. Mm-hmm. I think you are from Russia or from...
Yes.
Yes. So I had the chance once to be in St. Petersburg. I've been there a couple of times, but I was once in one of these big bakeries from 1933, created by Lenin. And it was a big round building with 6 floors. And that bakery was designed to make a maximum amount of bread in a minimum amount of time. I think they could make 1 million breads per day. So when you work with sourdough, the speed is totally different, because yeast, in 1 gram of yeast, you have 10 billion single yeast cells. And commercial yeast is designed to produce a maximum amount of gas in a very short time. So it's very powerful, and it makes the bread rise very fast. Now, in 1 gram of sourdough, you do not have the same quantity. It can vary from 1 million of yeast cells up to a couple of million of yeast cells. So not the same quantity as you have in sourdough. So the dough is reacting differently. When you mix a dough that you have prepared with only yeast, you see that it starts to ferment right after mixing. You see that already when you leave it for 20 minutes on the table, it starts to increase in volume. With sourdough, that goes much slower. You need 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours before you see any life happening. And so the feeling of the dough is different. The handling is different. But the most important thing is that when you have sourdough present in the recipe, is that you have the lactic acid bacteria. And when it comes to the health and well-being of us, the lactic acid bacteria are fulfilling the role of the digestion. We have in our intestines, we have the lactic acid bacteria and other microorganisms that take care of the digestion. Well, what happens in sourdough bread is that this digestion is already happening, and that's why sourdough bread is more healthy than regular bread. I'm not saying that regular bread is not healthy. I think it's still one of the healthiest foods, but a sourdough bread is way higher in nutritional values.
I understand, the process that happens inside, how it's different, but what about baking? Like, let's say if we have regular dough and sourdough, like, how is the process of baking different?
If you have a recipe with only yeast, you leave it for half an hour, 1 hour on the table. Then if you have a big dough, you divide it into small pieces or in the shape that you want. You leave it again like for 20 minutes, then you shape it, and then you leave it 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. And so in let's say 3 to 4 hours, you are from the start of the mixing till it comes out of the oven. So it takes you 4 hours. With sourdough, that's impossible. With sourdough, you will need at least 8 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours, depending on the temperature of your house or the temperature that you use to ferment your breads, on the activity of your sourdough, because the sourdough is actually very inconsistent. It is not always the same. The way you feed it, what the temperature, but also the lactic acid bacteria, they produce acids, and the yeasts, they don't like that. So there is always this battle. So it always depends at what time are you using your sourdough, at what moment. And that is not always easy to measure. And that's why there is these fluctuations. And when you make sourdough bread, and especially maybe your listeners are not all professionals and do home baking, you know when you start, but you don't know when you finish. With yeast bread, I know if I would start the dough right now, I know that in 4 hours it's baked. But when I start the dough with sourdough, it could be that I have to bake it at 10 o'clock this evening, or maybe at midnight, or maybe at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
That's the big difference.
But the baking itself, I guess it's similar, right? When you put it in the oven.
If you put it in the oven, the baking is actually similar. Just you have to. That process. There is not a big difference. The chemistry that happens in the oven is the same in a yeast bread or in a sourdough bread. The yeast bread will increase more in volume because there's much higher gas production in the bread than in a sourdough bread. But for the rest, the mechanism is the same. You first turn the dough into crumb, and then you develop the crust, and it's baked.
Okay. You mentioned that nutritionally it is different from regular bread that is not sourdough. Did you or do you measure like the nutrition profile, and how is it different?
Well, for the moment, we are running a couple of studies that we do together. We have one study that we run with Professor Marco Gobetti from the university in Bolzano in Italy. We have one study that we run with Professor Luc de Vuist here in Belgium. We have one that we run with a center in Spain. We have one that we are going to do with someone in the UK about the digestibility. So there is already some literature that says that sourdough is more beneficial for the nutritional values of a bread, but there is a little studies that really show that. So we are eagerly waiting. We have done an experiment 2 years ago in summertime with some people, and we did an in vitro testing about the digestibility of sourdough bread versus yeast bread, and we've seen clearly a positive impact with the sourdough bread. But we need to wait for the outcomes of all these different studies that we are doing right now, because these will give us really very hard copy that sourdough bread is so much better.
And what do you expect to see in those studies, like when it comes to digestibility and also maybe vitamins, minerals, or other compounds?
Well, one thing that we know is that because, and I mentioned the pH of the bread. Now, in when you have flour, there is one thing that is present, which is phytic acid in bread. In flour, there is a lot of phytic acid. And actually, phytic acid prevents our body to absorb nutrients. It's actually making a barrier between our body and the nutrients that are available in the bread. Now, what happens is that sourdough has a low pH, and when you add sourdough into the dough, you actually start lowering the total pH of that dough. Now, that is very beneficial for one enzyme that is also present in the flour, which is called phytase. And what this enzyme does is that it breaks down, it acts like a scissor actually, and it breaks down this phytic acid. So by reducing the amount of phytic acid in the bread, these nutrients suddenly become more available. So when you eat a sourdough bread, you know that there is no more phytic acid, or that at least the levels of phytic acid are lower, and our body can absorb more nutrients, especially in breads that contain high dosages of whole grains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically, I guess, sometimes when you look up nutritional profile of different bread, like they, mention certain vitamins and minerals, but what happens is not like all of them at all are available to human digestive systems. So I guess with sourdough, that just becomes much more available and causes less digestive issues.
I 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, I was visiting. There is a department in the zoo of Amsterdam, and I was invited there to have a chat with the microbiologist of that of the zoo. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
the thing is called Micropia, and he had like this copy of a human body with the intestines and so on, and he explained me. He said, "Look, actually, humans, we are not made." Our digestive system is not made to digest grains, vegetables. We are not made for that. He said our system needs too much time to convert this into, or to absorb the nutrients from grains or vegetables. He said, but we have in our stomach, in our intestines, we have huge amounts of microorganisms who are able to do that. So it's actually not our body, but it is the microorganisms that live in our body that take care of that. Now, by having this amazing pre-digestion through sourdough, when you make bread, you have access to all these nutrients. And it's the same if you just eat raw cabbage or you turn it first into sauerkraut. I think when you eat sauerkraut, you have less gas development in your body than when you just eat raw cabbage. And it's a bit the same with bread versus sourdough bread. That when you eat sourdough bread, you have less, for people who have sensitivity against gluten, or who say, "Oh, I cannot eat bread because I'm gluten intolerant." Well, with sourdough bread, you just get rid of these symptoms.
Yeah, I guess it's the same, with dairy products. Like somebody might have problems consuming milk, but be okay with like yogurts or fermented cheeses.
I have a quote here in the center that was written by an American writer, and he says, "Fermentation might have been a greater discovery than fire." And I do believe that everything that is fermented is actually very healthy for us. But it's a kind of a very complex system, and it has been forgotten. Many ingredients that we produce today are not fermented anymore, and we try to mimic the thing of fermentation by using other stuff. But today we start again to understand. Science helps us to explain, and that's why we have this library, because through study we can now really understand what is going on in a sourdough. And it's the same in winemaking and beer brewing and fermentation of yogurts and meats and chocolate and so on. It's much better. We understand it, and I think that in human history, the breads that we have today are the best in human history. The wines that we have are the best. The beers are the best. Everything that is fermented is only getting better and better because we finally understand what's going on.
You mentioned chocolate, and funny thing, when I eat raw cacao beans, I always have digestive problems. But when I eat chocolate that was properly fermented, I have no problems whatsoever. Dark chocolate 100%, and it just shows me, how those bacteria, they actually change the product, making it more like absorbable, causing less problems.
Right. Maybe because you eat too much chocolate.
I do, but you see, I eat the same amount of like 100% chocolate, right? So it's not sweetened, and then the same amount of cacao beans that just whole cacao beans that were not fermented at all. And I always have problems with those cacao beans.
But usually, it's because normally to make chocolate, if you want a nice flavor, you need to ferment the cocoa beans. Sometimes they do not ferment. It's not all chocolate is made from fermented cocoa beans. So maybe you should look for another brand of cocoa beans, because normally if they are well fermented, you shouldn't have the problem.
Yeah, probably. I look into that. Never thought about that, actually.
We have in Vietnam we have our own plantations. So the company, we do not only make bread, but we also make chocolate. So in Vietnam and in Mexico, we have our own plantations. And in the past, the farmers were doing their own fermentation. And it was different in every place because they didn't master. But what we do today is that we take care of the fermentation. So we mix all the beans from all the farmers together, and we ferment them with top-notch technology. And we teach the farmers how to do that for the future. And we even have a whole program of we call it cocoa trays, and where we give remuneration. Every kilo of chocolate that we sell, there is 10 cents that goes back to the farmers to be educated and so on. So fermentation in chocolate is also very important. It's nice you raised the topic.
Yeah, it's amazing that now you're able to control that better, as you said, now that you understand it better. And so that, I guess, also translates into more or less the same quality and taste when you want it, and you can change it as you want.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So, and tell our listeners now a little bit more about the library. What is Sourdough library? When somebody hears library, the word library, they think of like books or music, but we have food.
Here, yes. So we have, it's a place where we have fridges at 4 degrees and where we keep living sourdough in jars that is fed every 2 months in order to preserve the microorganisms inside. And they are studies of objects to study. So when we get a sourdough here, we send a part of it to the university with whom we develop the project. And there the sourdough is completely analyzed. It means that they take these little Petri dishes, they dilute the sourdough, they inoculate the Petri dishes. And as such, it takes 3 months, more or less, before all the microorganisms are isolated on a different Petri dish. And then once they are isolated, they can identify them. And as such, we learn from each sourdough what kind of microorganisms are inside. And we can start comparing them. We get a lot of data that we can use to play with. And then these sourdoughs become object of studies. Like we have for the moment 10 of these sourdoughs. We have 128 for the moment, but 10 of them are part of one of these studies that I was mentioning that we do together with Professor Gobetti. They are part of a digestibility study. So as such, what we try to do in the library is the preservation of sourdough, for the simple reason that many bakeries who have sourdoughs for generations, or sometimes in a family, there is always the risk that it gets lost due to a fire in a bakery, due to a death in a family that someone stops, and it would be a pity. So what we try to do is to have all the sourdoughs in the world registered on my website, which is called The Quest for Sourdough, where I ask everyone to register their sourdough, and from there I have a better view on what's going on in the world and where are the sourdoughs that need to be preserved here in the library for the future. Because once the sourdough is here, it is preserved. We have the microorganisms that are isolated. We store them in freezers of -80. And we have the sourdough here that can also serve as a backup in case something would go wrong in the bakery or at the person from whom I got it, its house or its school or whatever.
And how do you source your sourdoughs? Like you mentioned that people register their sourdoughs on your website.
Yes.
Do you do any other search yourself, or you just wait?
Yes. Well, I have a broad network, of course, and we have bakeries. Pirados is present in more than 70 countries all around the world. So we have a lot of bakeries that are our customers. But it's not only Sometimes there is a pizzeria. A pizzeria is not immediately buying our products. So there is a lot of people that is not inside our network. And so through the website, I try to discover, but I get requests from people every day that send me message, and they say, Karl, I want my sourdough in your library. Now, the library is a non-for-profit initiative that we've taken, and so we have a certain budget that we can spend. Now, doing one of these analyses of a sourdough it's not something that is fast and cheap. Mm-hmm. So we have a limited amount. I can add approximately 24 sourdoughs per year here in the library. So we have to select carefully. Mm-hmm. But once it's there, it's there. And we do not use them for commercial purposes. It's not that when we get a sourdough that we can copy it and that we can produce it. That's not the aim. The aim is really to use them as study objects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you locate the sourdough that you want, how does it usually get to the library? How do you transport it?
Well, sometimes I'm the lucky one who can go there and pick it up, or we have a kind of, we call it a collector box, and it's a big box with isolation material inside, and it's supposed to maintain a starter for 96 hours at 4 degrees. That's mm-hmm. enough time for us to get it back here. So it's the box. It's an empty box, but we add 3 empty jars with the label. We add a bag, and we send that to or the place itself where the sourdough is going to be picked up, or we send it to the subsidiary of Puratos. If there is a subsidiary of Puratos, we send it to my colleague of R&D. Mm-hmm. And then they go to the place with the box. We do the paperwork because we need to know the protocol. What kind of flour do you use? How did you start your starter? What kind of refreshments you feed it? What do you make with it? We try to collect as much information as possible, and then the jars have to be filled with sourdough. I need 1.5 kg, 3 times 500 grams. The empty bag we ask to fill with a couple of kilos of flour so that we can start refresh when the sourdough arrives here in Belgium. And then the box, there is like these freezing elements inside, like a cool box, mm-hmm. that they first have to put in the freezer, and then they close the box, they send it back through UPS, DHL, whatever freight company. And then when it arrives here in Belgium, we put 1 jar in the fridge of the library, 1 jar we keep in our microbiology to do the tests that we can, like we measure the pH, we measure the total titratable acidity, we measure the amount of lactic acid, the amount of acetic acid, the color, the viscosity, stuff that we can do. And then the 3rd jar is sent to the university.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's me. Sometimes I go to the country, and then I take my cameraman and I make movies about it. On my website, you find movies about my sourdough stories, or it's one of my colleagues from the country that goes to do that.
Cool. So your sourdough career also allows you to travel the world.
Oh, but I travel already since more than 20 years. In the beginning, when I was a technical advisor, I traveled around the world to go and teach customers how to work with our products, or mm-hmm. train colleagues on how to make certain things. So I'm traveling a lot, and now the last 12 years, it's only linked to sourdough. And the most funny thing is that, yes, if I can go somewhere to pick up a sourdough and make a movie about it, I come in places that I would never imagine, because sometimes I end up in the kitchen of an old lady in China, or in a small village in Greece where they do crazy things, or in a bakery in Mexico that I never seen before, or in Japan, or whatever. Yeah, it's very exciting, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that.
What would you say was, one of the most interesting places you visited because of sourdough?
Ooh. I think every place has something interesting. Sometimes it's the way people bake. Sometimes it is the way they make their sourdough. And when I was in Mexico, the baker was actually refreshing its sourdough with beer, lime, and eggs. That's something that I'd never seen before. When I was in Turkey last year in October, I was in Turkey, and I've seen a bread there in a bakery in the mountains. The way they make it, so they have this big mixer, 800 kilo of dough, more or less, that they ferment for a couple of hours, and then they have a big bucket that they dip their arms up to their elbows in the bucket with water. Then they grab a piece of dough of 3 to 4 kilos, and while they walk towards the wood-fired oven, they shape the bread. They put it on the oven loader, and then they just put it in the oven. That was something that I was like, what is this? I have seen already many things, but when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, what is here? So everywhere there is something. I guess if I would go to Russia, I would discover again some new stuff, and that's the same for every country probably.
Yeah, my grandma actually, when I was growing up, I visited my grandma in the village a lot, and the only bread she used to make was sourdough bread.
Yes.
And that's the only bread actually that doesn't give me any trouble.
So you call it zakvaska? How you zakvaska?
Yeah.
You see,
yeah.
I know.
And it can mean different things, sometimes it's for some dairy product, sometimes it's for sourdough. And what was really interesting, well, now interesting as I think about it, as you can make not just bread from it, but you can make sweet kind of like pastries too.
Everything. There is no limit of what you can do with sourdough. You can make pancakes, you can make the most amazing waffles that I've tasted in my life were made with sourdough. And I am from Brussels. Mm-hmm. So there is this waffle from Brussels that I thought was the best. Yeah. But when I was 2 years ago in Canada, discovering a sourdough from Ione, she's a lady, at that time she was 85, and she had a sourdough from her great-great-grandfather, and she used that in order to make waffles. It was the best waffle I've ever tasted in my life, and it's because of the sourdough. Yeah. So yes, cookies, cakes, muffins, sweet goods, everything goes with sourdough, because the big advantage again there is that this pre-digestion is happening. So it makes the product just better.
I had a question in mind and I forgot. But you mentioned, some interesting stories about sourdough and how you go to different places to pick it up. So what are maybe some of your favorite samples of sourdough with some interesting stories right now in the library? Like maybe you have your favorites. Or maybe a couple of interesting stories.
Every sourdough is unique. Well, I think that the ones from which I make movies have probably the most interesting story. Yeah? So I have number one is from Altamura, and that was a sourdough or a bread at least that was already described in 37 before Christ as being one of the best in the Roman Empire. And it's made with durum wheat flour, and it's also the shape is very different, and it's a really nice bread. I've been to San Francisco. There is this big thing with San Francisco style breads. So these are nice stories. Well, in Mexico, well, definitely with the beer and the lime, and then the way they prepare the bread, they make what they call in Spanish torta ahogada, and it means that when the bread is ready, it has a very thick crust and a nice crumb. And they prepare it with what they call carnitas. Carnitas is a kind of pork meat that has been simmering for a couple of hours with oranges, with oregano, with some lard inside, and it is full of flavor. And then when they stuff the bread with this meat, and then before serving, they dip it or they cover it completely with a very nice hot tomato sauce. So the crumb becomes a bit moist, but still crusty. And yeah, the flavor is amazing. So that was a beautiful story. The sourdough from Greece that I have is actually made with holy water. Like in the Greek Orthodox religion, there is this legend that Saint Helena found the cross of Jesus Christ back in 300, I don't know, 46 or 60, 65. And it was covered apparently with basil leaves. So when they celebrate Stavros, that's the day when she found the cross, it's on the 14th of September. The ladies bring basil to the church, and the priest is actually using this basil. He dips it in water, and he uses it to bless the people in the church. And this water is actually contaminated with the microorganisms from the basil. And after the celebration, the ladies, they take home the water and they use it to bless their house, but also to make the sourdough. So that was an interesting story, and the bread was very nice that we tasted. I have the one from China. I didn't know that China had such a wheat culture as well. In the south, they eat a lot of rice, but in the north, they eat a lot of bread. But the bread is not baked, but it's steamed. So it's very white, and the flavor is a bit less pronounced than when you have a crust. But still, it was nice to see that they ferment it traditionally with sourdough. So they have a sourdough culture. I have one sourdough from Tokyo, which is dating back to 1875, and it is made not with flour, but they use cooked rice to do it. That's something amazing. And then the sourdoughs that I got from the Klondike Gold Rush. It was in 1896. The gold rush in the Klondike started, and 100,000 people wanted to go to look for gold, and they had to do it in temperatures of minus 30, minus 40 degrees. And the only thing that was not freezing was flour. And as such, they had like 200, 300, 400 kilo of flour with them, because the journey was long. It took them a couple of months to go to the gold mines. They had this little bag around their neck in linen with sourdough inside, or at least with a blend of sourdough and flour, that whenever they stopped, they had this little this little stove that they could use with kerosene or whatever, and they were able to make pancakes, or they call it hotcakes. So for these people, when they made it to the gold mines, they got the nickname sourdough. Now you are a sourdough. So it's very well documented. So that made it very interesting. And then, the ones that I got lately from Turkey also have an amazing story. There is this sourdough 125 that comes from Anita Sumer. She's very well known on Instagram as Sourdough Mania from Slovenia. Her sourdough is Rudel. It also has a nice story with it, and what she does with it is also very nice. So I do not have one favorite, because I would like do harm to the others. But that's the beauty about sourdough, is that it's very unique, and most of the time the people behind the sourdough is even there. Do you hear that or not?
Yeah, I do.
I don't know how to do that, but I get these reminders in my computer. Sorry for that. But the people behind the sourdough is even more beautiful than the sourdough itself. That's the nice thing about this project.
Cool. I really advise people who are listening to check out, your website and all your movies. I'm sure.
The thing is that whenever someone registers his or her sourdough, and I do have not enough people from Russia on the website. I have only a couple of sourdoughs registered. The website is translated in Russian, so it's available in Russian. And I'm looking for rye sourdoughs, because we want to study rye sourdoughs. We have a lot of wheat sourdoughs. I want rye sourdoughs. So whenever someone registers, the chances are high that we will contact them to get a small piece of sourdough in order to do a first study. And then in a second phase, we can admit them into the library. So that would be very nice. And my dream is that one day I can invite everyone who has registered his or her sourdough on the website, and we almost have 2,000 for the moment, to send me a piece of their sourdough so that we can do the analysis, because the technology is getting better. The way you can extract actually DNA is becoming easier. And so one day we will be able to not only to have all the sourdoughs from the world in the library and not just a selected amount. So that's my dream, that through the website, for the moment, we are mapping all the sourdoughs, but in a second phase, when technology allows it, we would like to identify all the sourdoughs from the world.
That's an amazing project. I think you'll be able to do it with technology moving forward faster and faster.
I am very confident that one day it will happen. I will probably be with this project for, let's say, 12, 15 years more, and I believe that it will happen, or I will make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, good luck with this project. By the way, Karl, I just wanted to let our listeners know that this podcast is going to be on YouTube, and they can see how the library actually looks. Behind you.
If this. Okay. Well, let's do a small tour then.
That would be perfect.
I will walk to the door, and I will come backwards, so you see the library behind me.
Yeah. I have all the fridges.
It's all the fridges. The wood, walls. The ceiling is quite unique.
Like trees.
Yes, we went to the woods and we are lying on our back and take a picture from the trees. And then here you see the fridges.
Yeah, with sourdoughs.
With all the different sourdoughs that we have, and I will go there so you can see that sourdoughs do have different consistency. This is one
color.
That a lot of water. This is one, the 74 is a sourdough from Switzerland made with whole rye flour. So I guess in Russia there must be a couple of these.
Probably. I think also like Helsinki and Finland have a lot of rye sourdoughs.
Well, in all the countries where there is a rye culture, and I know because from Finland, I have a lady there called Elisa Kysela who helps me with the quest. And there is I think 88 sourdoughs already from Finland that are registered on the website. So like this one is from Turkey. And look, it's
here. It's grainy.
It's actually containing a little bit of water, so it's a very stiff sourdough, very liquid. So this is how we do it. So the fridges are at 4 degrees, and that's how it looks here.
And also, that looks amazing. So thank you for a little tour. And would you say every sourdough has slightly different taste?
Yes.
Because of bacteria, not just, the grain itself.
Yes. And that's something that we try to understand. And it's something that we, little by little, it unveils, and we start to be able to see if you have a Lactobacillus plantarum, for instance, which is the scientific name, or a Lactobacillus sanfrancisensis, or you have a Leuconostoc. These sourdoughs tend to smell different. So the more sourdoughs we get here, the more insights we get on, all right, if you have this kind of lactic acid bacteria, or the yeasts, you have, of course, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the common baker's yeast, or the beer yeast, let's say. Many sourdoughs do contain that in its wild form, and not in the commercial form, but in its wild form. But then there is also, there can be a yeast like Torulaspora del Brucchi or a Kazakhstania, and these, they behave differently. So the esters and so what happens that during the digestion, during the fermentation, the lactic acid bacteria, they degrade the gluten network. Actually, they turn them into amino acids. And these amino acids are then consumed by the yeasts and turned into aldehydes and all these flavor molecules. So by seeing the consortium of microorganisms and knowing what kind of animals you have living together has the impact on the flavor profile. And that is something that the more sourdoughs we get, the better we will start to understand that.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? How different microorganisms just change the flavor profile of any food.
Yes, but it's not only the microorganism itself; it's also the temperature,
Yes.
because a slightly different temperature. When, let's say, if you go from 29 to 31 degrees, sometimes the sourdough can change completely, because you have these two families of microorganisms, the homofermentative and the heterofermentative, and some of them are active at warm temperatures. Homofermentative is above 30 degrees and heterofermentative below 30 degrees, 25, 20. And the heterofermentative, they are able to produce acetic acid, which is more vinegar. And the homofermentative, they can only produce lactic acid. So by switching in temperature, you can suddenly have another sourdough. That's why in the beginning, when you asked me, you said, what is the difference, or what you asked me something, I can't remember the question, but the inconsistency of sourdough, or I mentioned it myself, it's the temperature. If you do not respect the temperature, and it's a very difficult variable, because the temperature outside and inside is not always the same, so that might impact the flavor of the sourdough.
Yeah, I guess, it's kind of similar to our human intestines, meaning that if you change conditions, like maybe feeding different foods or like stress levels and different chemicals, you change the bacteria that live in our gut.
Absolutely. I have done that already. I've had it already analyzed twice, my microbiome, and there has been a difference over the last 2 years. So yes, what you eat is important for how your intestines are populated.
Yeah, I'm sure, and that's why I'm such a huge. I'm very passionate about learning about history and the process behind those like different foods, because they differently affect our gut health, our gut microbiome. And
I guess then you will be interested, because in the month of September or November, Vanessa Kimball. Do you know Vanessa Kimball? Vanessa Kimball, you should look her up. She's in the sourdough school in the UK, sourdoughschool.com, or just look up Vanessa Kimball. She's writing a book about this. She's writing a book. Her book will be Sweet Sourdough. And I had the chance to test a couple of the recipes just to be sure that it was working. And it's just amazing. And the book is all about the impact of sourdough on the human gut. So there is a lot of information in there that might be useful for the viewers.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I'm going to look it up, and put all the information.
I'm thrilled with what I've been doing here lately with this book. Yeah.
Me too. It sounds like you're doing really amazing and so much needed work, because we do need to know all these details, those deeper details about the food that we put on our table. So thank you for doing this work. As the final thing, what I'd like to do, if you have a favorite recipe of yours that you could share with our listeners, really something simple that people could make at home using sourdough.
If you have a waffle iron, the waffles, because that is really very simple.
Okay.
So it's made from wheat sourdough, and the viewers can always go back to the website, the Quest for Sourdough. The recipe is there. So if I'm not clear in my explanation, people can just read it out. You need, let's say you have 100 grams of sourdough, mature sourdough, and on a Saturday night, you take 250 grams of water and 250 grams of flour that you mix with the sourdough, and you leave it overnight on the kitchen counter. And on Sunday morning, from this, you have 600 grams. You take 100 grams that you stow away. You don't throw away. You take it, you put it in the fridge. That's for the next time you want to bake. And these 500 grams, you add 100 grams of melted butter or canola oil, a neutral oil, but I like to use butter. You add a pinch of salt. You add 3 eggs, and the eggs you can whip them together, or you can separate the white and the yolks. You blend the yolks and the white, you whip them separately, and you can fold them in gently. If you want, you can add a little bit of sugar, let's say 20 grams or 30 grams of sugar, but it's not necessary, because on a waffle you can put the sugar afterwards, or you can use the waffle in a salted recipe. You can use it with meat or with eggs or whatever. So what did I forget? We have the flour, we have the sourdough, we have the eggs, we have the oil, we have the butter or the oil, the salt, the baking soda. 5 grams of baking soda, which is a coffee spoon or a teaspoon. And the coffee, the soda, you add just at the end. When your waffle iron is hot, you add it into the batter, you mix, and then you start baking immediately. And it gives you a fantastic waffle. And you can do the same. There is also a recipe to make pancakes that I got from Ariana. She was a lady who accompanied me as a guide on my trip to the Klondike Gold Rush, and she showed me how to make sourdough pancakes. It's almost the same. There's just only 1 egg instead of 3, and there's a bit of milk powder in the recipe. But it's also available on the website. So these are the easy and simple things.
And I'm sure people would love it.
Everybody can do it. It's giving you the best waffle, the best pancakes. You can even fold blueberries in the pancakes because they remain very nice. They have a thick skin, so they don't become watery. Yeah. Everybody has to try.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm going to link all of it in the show notes. And I'm probably going to make some soon as I get some sourdough ready. That's probably the longest part of the recipe.
My recipe, I have a recipe also. I will send you links to my recipe to make sourdough, my recipe to make bread with that sourdough, the waffles, the pancakes. So you have
that would be amazing. Yeah, I'd really appreciate it.
Many people have already tried it and it works. So
I'm sure. I have no doubt. It just, I guess the quest is for me to make it work, because I don't consider myself such a skillful cook, but it sounds, simple. So I'm going to try.
It will be.
Yeah. So thank you again, Karl, for your time and sharing all these amazing stories about sourdough and microorganisms and, this important food on our table. So that it was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure our listeners,
I don't remember your name.
My name is Angela.
Angela. Well, it was my pleasure, Angela, talking to you. And I hope, a lot of people will watch this and become part of our quest for sourdough.
Yeah, I'm sure, we are all connected through food. And the more we know about it, the more we know about our world and ourselves. So
the beauty about bread is that bread is actually a food that unites everything. You can have a nice piece of meat and a nice glass of wine, or a nice piece of cheese and a nice glass of beer or chocolate or whatever. But it is through bread that you can unite them perfectly. Because if you just have cheese and meat and wine, there is something missing. If you only have chocolate and wine or beer, the bread can unite it. And bread has played such an important role in humans' history that it, from the moment that we started to settle, from the moment we started to grow cereals and wheats, we were able to produce bread for a big amount of people. And these people had not to take care of their food anymore. They could do something else. They could build the pyramids. They could build railroads. They could build universities, schools. A teacher did not have to pay attention to his food. He could get bread, and he could instruct children to give them more luggage for the rest of their life. So it's actually through bread that humans have civilized. And what we are today is thanks to bread. And bread has played an important role, and I think that bread should continue to play an important role on the nutritional level of our life.
Yeah, but only specific kind of bread, the sourdough bread.
Well, preferably sourdough, preferably a part of the whole grain or whole grain.
Mm-hmm.
And then the best is even to top it with seeds. When I make bread at home, I use whole grain that I mill myself, and I add pumpkin, sunflower, amaranth, hemp, poppy seeds, sesame seeds, chia seeds, all the seeds you can find.
Mm-hmm.
Just add them into the bread, linseeds, whatever, add them into the bread because it's just better.
Yeah, they're so
And
nutritious.
it's tasty, and it's more tasty.
Yeah. So thank you, Karl. Thank you for sharing all of this. It was a really fascinating conversation. And send me, please, those recipes. And we'll stay in touch. Looking forward for more movies and more sourdough experiments.
All right. Whenever you want.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.